Hey guys, Skellington80 here. So, I welcome you to the finale of 25 Days of Monsters. It's all been leading up to this, the end of the book and the final story. So I hope you all enjoy it. Today we have the story of Zahaak from the Shahnameh, I don't know, by Ferdowsi in 1010. The category is Cursed Human. Base of operations is Persia and most of the world. When, as an awful long time ago, powers as he has snakes for shoulders, and the most desperate need is eating human brains daily for 1,000 years. The fear factor is 5, even though that's kind of relative. And this is one of the best illustrations of the book. Look at this. He has Jafar vibes, and existed before Jafar was even a thing. Oh boy, he looks great. He just looks so creepy and cool. And again, Tim Seibert did an absolutely great job of illustrating this thing. I commend him for his skills and think he's a really good illustrator. Alright. So, without further ado, let's begin our finale. It starts like a fairy tale. A long time ago, in the land of Arabia, there lived a prince named Zahaak. One day, a man named Eblis approached the crown prince Zahaak and whispered in his ear that he would be a better king than his father. For the good of the country, Eblis said the better king must be put on the throne, which meant that the old king, alas, had to die. So with some regret, Zahaak and Eblis plotted the king's murder. They dug a pit in the king's garden, and on an afternoon stroll, he fell in and broke his neck. Quick work with the shovel buried all evidence of the crime. Soon Zahaak was king of Arabia, and everyone was happy. But Eblis suggested to his friend King Zahaak that he could have even more. Why be content as king of Arabia when he could be king of the world? As Zahaak mulled over this advice, Eblis secretly kissed the king on his shoulders, and surprisingly, from each shoulder sprang a snake, hissing and spitting right next to Zahaak's ears. He tried to cut the snakes off of his shoulders with a knife, but they simply grew back again like branches on a tree. Night and day the snakes writhed, for they were hungry. They were driving Zahaak crazy, and Eblis, as chief advisor, suggested that the best way to get rid of the snakes would be to feed them a daily diet of the brains of 2 men, and such a diet would surely kill the snakes. So Zahaak had 2 of his men slain every day and fed their brains to the shoulder snakes, hoping they would become sick and die, but they didn't. They grew stronger. Zahaak grew stronger too, and people began to call him the Dragon King. Not content with just being king of Arabia, Zahaak assembled an army and marched into neighboring Persia. The rightful king of Persia, Jamshid, had been reigning for 700 years, but Zahaak pursued him to the ends of the earth and cut him in two with a saw. Persia was the most important kingdom in the world at the time, and Zahaak found that in becoming king of Persia had slipped the world on his finger as if it were a ring. And after that, things got bad. It was already pretty bad because he was killing men and feeding their brains to his shoulder snakes, but then it got worse. Believe it or not, a king with man-eating snakes growing out of his shoulders was not the best choice to rule the world. For 1,000 years, Zahaak reigned, encouraging every evil deed. Slavery, necromancy, and arson flourished for 1,000 years, and no men spake of good unless by stealth. And of course, every day another 2 men died, and their brains went to the snakes. And this happened every day for 1,000 years. One day, Zahaak gathered all the sages and wisest men in the world to his court, and he asked them to sign a document proclaiming that everything Zahaak had ever done had been for the greater good, that he speaketh truth and wrongeth none. The terrified sages were in the process of signing when a blacksmith named Kaveh stormed into the castle demanding justice. "Tell us who hath wronged thee," Zahaak asked. And Kaveh said it was Zahaak who had wronged him. He said his son had been taken to provide snake food, and this Kaveh insisted was an injustice. Surprised by the public rebuke, he shockingly released his son and asked Kaveh to sign the proclamation. But Kaveh was not satisfied, and after reading the document, he tore it in two and trampled to pieces. Then he went outside and began calling in the marketplace for the end of Zahaak's reign. He hung his leather smith's apron on a spear as a rallying flag, and wherever he went, people flocked to his banner, for they had come to hate Zahaak and his evil ways. Now, although Zahaak had long ago tried to kill all of King Jamshid's relatives, one grandnephew named Feridun still lived. When Feridun heard of Kaveh, he assembled an army and joined forces with the blacksmith, and took the leather apron as his own battle standard. I don't know quite what that means, but whatever. Feridun marched on Zahaak's palace, and Zahaak fled in fear before the might of his army, only to slip back in by secret ways to kill Feridun a day later. But Feridun saw the Mountain King and struck him with a mace the size of a mountain crag, with an image of an ox's head carved on top. Miraculously, the blow didn't kill him, but it knocked him senseless. Feridun did not kill Zahaak, but he bound him to a mountain crag with a lasso. And nailed him down upon a rock in a narrow gorge in Mount Damavand. There Zahaak stayed, so his anguish might endure. He may be there, but maybe not. After all, the snakes on his shoulders have only one brain to feast on now. Beyond the book, the rest of the Shahnameh, abridged. The story of Zahaak comes from the Shahnameh, or Book of Kings, an epic Persian poem written by Ferdowsi 1,000 years ago. Much of the poem is concerned with the great deeds of monster-fighting heroes, especially Rustam, a Hercules-like warrior who rides an enormous horse and fights with a great club. Rustam battles lions and invisible dragons and evil hags, and also other great warriors, such as Esfandiar, a man who can only be killed by a shot through both eyes with a double-headed arrow, and of course he makes the shot. Ferdowsi's poem continues into historical times, including Alexander the Great's conquest of Persia and the wars of Persia and Rome, and that concludes with the Muslim Arabs' invasion of Persia in the 7th century, an event that marked the end of traditional Persian culture. Sohrab and Rustam. One part of the Shahnameh is best known to English speakers from an adaptation by the poet Matthew Arnold. His long poem Sohrab and Rustam, 1853, tells the story of the Persian hero Rustam, who fights his son in combat without recognizing him. Only after stabbing his enemy with a spear does Rustam realize he has killed his own son. He cast his arms around his son's neck and wept aloud, and kissed him, and awe fell on both the hosts when they saw Rustam's grief. All of Matthew Arnold's great poems are depressing. His most famous poem, Dover Beach, 1867, is all about how life is meaningless and possesses neither joy nor love, nor light, nor certitude nor peace, nor help for pain. A grieving Rustam might agree. And, surprisingly, that is not the end of the book. We have a bit more before we go, and I thought I would include this in the video to sort of wrap things up more fittingly. Okay, all the books mentioned in this book. All these books are old enough to be in the public domain, which means they are free to copy and distribute, and you can easily find them on the internet on archive.org, Project Gutenberg, or Google Books. Not all translations are public domain, though, and some books have no English translations old enough. While all these books are well worth a read, the books in purple are the most fun and accessible, so it might be best to start with those. The books in bold are the sources for these 25 monster stories featured in the book. Okay, so I'm just going to hold this up to the screen for a second, and you can take a screenshot if you want. So, Okay. Yeah, you guys can see it. Okay, I'm gonna take the book away and now. Okay. I hope that was enough time for you to screenshot it. Oh my. Here you go. One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, 10, and we're turning the page. And finally, this is the last one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, that should be enough time to screenshot them. You can pause and screenshot if you want. Further reading. Many of the monsters and other characters featured in this book appear in a variety of other stories throughout time. Here are recommendations for exploring these characters and tales more fully. Golems. The legend of the golem appears in many books, but two of the best are by Isaac Bashevis Singer and Elie Wiesel, both Nobel Prize winners. They're both titled The Golem, The Shahnameh, which is what we just read. Both characters from The Shahnameh appear in Edward Fitzgerald's translation of... I'm not even going to try to read that. Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, Khayyym, 1859, which was one of the most popular poems of the 19th century and started a craze for Persian poetry. Dracula. All vampires were quite the fashion 100 years ago, and there are lots of recommended great vampire stories to move on after Dracula. In addition, ones we recommend in the Dracula chapter, you can also... In addition to those we recommended in the Dracula chapter, you can try the short stories Good Lady Duquesne by Mary Elizabeth Braddon, 1896, For Blood is the Life by F. Marion Crawford, 1911, and The Room in the Tower by E. F. Benson, 1912. The Invisible Man. If you can't get enough of mad scientists turning invisible, Jack London wrote a story on just that topic, The Shadow and the Flash, in 1903. Lamia. The deal about eyes popping out comes from Daniel Ogden's book Perseus, which has more information on that hero than any other book ever written. If you want to read more by John Keats, La Belle Dame sans Merci, 1819, is both short and terrifying. Greek mythology. For generations, the first book of Greek mythology to read has been Thomas Bulfinch's The Age of Fable by 1855. There are plenty more of excellent, more recent books on the subject, such as Edith Hamilton's Mythology, or for younger readers, D'Aulaire's. It's D'Aulaire's Book of Greek Myths by Ingrid and Edgar D'Aulaire. Norse mythology. The Norse gods that kill Fafnir's brother have had many other adventures. The myths about them have been told many times, but Padraig Colum's The Children of Odin, 1920, is a particularly good one that's easily available. Much more recently, Neil Gaiman's Norse mythology covers the same grounds. A note on translations. Many of the monsters in this book come from books that were not originally written in English. In these cases, the quotations come from public domain translations. Public domain means that a text can be quoted or printed freely, because most of those translations are old. However, they can be a mixed bag, and some of them use deliberately archaic language for color. If you are brave enough to read the books mentioned in this book. However, here are some tips on translations. The two translations of Homer's Odyssey used, Samuel Butcher and Andrew Lang's and Samuel Butler's, are perfectly readable and a lot of fun. Butler has a pet theory that Homer was a woman, and this theory colors some of his choices, but if you just want to get a good story, these work fine. For something a little looser, The Children's Homer by Padraig Colum, 1918, is also a good choice. The Epic of Gilgamesh offers its own set of challenges because the early translators were dealing with incomplete, crumbling tablets, and their translations tend to be fragmentary, misinformed, and unsatisfying. Our quotes will come from public domain translations by William Muss Arnold and Morris Chastrow Jr., but if you want to read Gilgamesh to ever learn if he does get the secret of immortality, find a more recent version. Stephen Mitchell and Herbert Mason have good ones that are easy to find, and the earliest mistranslations, because they are based on fragments, often leave out big chunks of the story, and translators often have to not very accurately guess what is happening in places. Although there are plenty of public domain translations of the Shahnameh, none of them are very good. All of our quotes are from the 1905 translation by Arnold George Warner and Edmund Warner. Not the worst translation, but a little dull. You might want to try the 3 volumes of Stories from the Shahnameh of Ferdowsi, retold by Ihsan Yarshater, and translated by Dick Davis, or if you're more ambitious, Dick Davis's more faithful translation, published by Viking Books as Shahnameh, the Persian Book of Kings. Ernest J.B. Kirtland's translation of Beowulf is faithful but not very readable. Try reading something more recent instead, such as Shamas Heaney's version. Heaney, I don't know. Many older translations of Jules Verne's books are heavily cut and should be read with caution. Frederick Paul Walter's translation is a recent one used in this book with permission. There's no public domain translation of The Golem, but Mike Mitchell's is the better of the 2 English translations available. Ariosto's Cinque Canti has no public domain English translation, but Orlando Ferry also has several. Readers coming to this book for the first time may find more enjoyment reading Thomas Bulfinch's long summary of the book in Legends of Charlemagne in 1864, though. The earliest stories about Valentine and Orson in French and German, but there are plenty in English translations to choose from. Walter Crane's Valentine and Orson is very short, easy to read, and beautifully illustrated, and also public domain. More recently, Nancy Ekholm Burkert has written a good public version for young readers, also titled Valentine and Orson. And here's a list of the translations used. Again, you will have some time to screenshot it if you so choose to. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, we're turning the page. And even more monsters. This is a pretty good way to end the book and a fine way to end the series, I suppose. There are so many great monsters from so many great books that you might want to dedicate the rest of your life to poring over monster stories. If so, here are 20 more nightmares to meet. Caliban, but from The Tempest by William Shakespeare, circa 1610. The son of a witch and the devil, and the native of Prospero's island, Caliban is both pitiable and monstrous. Calots from A Princess of Mars by Edgar Rice Burroughs in 1912. 10-legged, pony-sized Martian dogs with giant mouths like frogs' mouths, but full of long, sharp tusks. Charlotte Clopton from Clopton House by Elizabeth Gaskell in 1838. The ghost of a young girl who was accidentally buried alive, and sealed in the tomb, she ate one of her shoulders in the agonies of despair and hunger. Now with one shoulder, she haunts her ancestral home. The Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come from A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens in 1843. The final spirit to visit the miserly Ebenezer Scrooge on Christmas Eve, and shrouded in a black garment except for one spectral hand, this ghost offered grim visions of the future. Jasconius from The Voyage of St. Brendan and the Abbot, circa 900. A fish so gigantic that sailors mistake it for an island. It is ever trying to make its head and tail meet, but cannot succeed because of its great length. Kalidas from The Wonderful Wizard of Oz by L. Frank Baum in 1900, which are monstrous beasts with bodies like bears and heads like tigers. Koshchi the Deathless from Russian Fairy Tales by Alexander Afanasyev, 1915. The son of Baba Yaga, Koshchi is a sorcerer who keeps his soul in an egg instead of his body. As long as the egg remains intact, Koshchi's body cannot die. Lachanopters from A True Story by Lucien, 2nd century. Gigantic spacefaring birds with leaves of lettuce instead of feathers. They're just one of the innumerable bizarre space creatures from Lucien's book. Marguerite of Quether by Sabine Baring-Gould in 1884. A dull-sized, shriveled-up old woman who drains the blood of the living through her single hollow tooth. The Minotaur from Lives by Plutarch in circa 100. Half man and half bull with twofold shape combined. The Minotaur lives in the twisting corridors of a Cretan labyrinth and eats Athenians. Mongo Din from Life in a Thousand Worlds by W.S. Harris, who is in 1905, who is a gigantic man-ape from the planet of Jupiter. The Phantom of the Opera The Phantom of the Opera by Gaston Leroux, and a musical production of the same name, which was produced later on in 1910. I mean the book, not the musical play, but whatever. You could have probably guessed that. A deformed music buff who lives in the secret passage of the opera house he himself built. Look at this illustration. Isn't that just so cool? Tim Seibert really did a good job on these. I definitely commend him for his illustrations, and I would recommend the book for those alone. Quasimodo from The Hunchback of Notre Dame by Victor Hugo in 1831. Jeez, that's just kind of mean. A hunchbacked, one-eyed bell ringer grown deaf from so many years clanging the bells in the Notre Dame Cathedral with a forked chin and one tooth like the tusk of an elephant. The Rock from The Travels of Marco Polo in 1298. A giant bird so large and strong that it can seize an elephant with its talons, lift it into the air, from whence it lets it fall onto the ground, so that in order that when dead it may prey upon the carcass. Cyapods from The Travels of Sir John Mandeville in 1357. A race of hopping dwarfs with a single foot so large that it shadoweth all the body against the sun where they will lie and rest. The Sphinx from Oedipus the King by Sophocles in 1429 BC. Part lion, part lady, the Sphinx of Thebes strangles anyone who cannot answer her dark riddle. Tupalak from Eskimo Folk Tales by Nud Ramazan, 1921. A monster fashioned by a wizard out of the carcasses and bones of animals, all stuck together and brought to life Frankenstein style. The Wendigo from, The Wendigo by Algernon Blackwood in 1910. A wild beast from the Canadian North, capable of transforming humans into smaller copies of itself. The Zin from The Maker of Moons by Robert W. Chambers in 1896. A cross between a sea urchin and a spider and the devil. The Zin is one being with 1,000 bodies that crawl independently of each other. And finally, Yeth Hounds from Lost Beauties of the English Language by Charles Mackay, 1874. Hounds without heads, supposed to be animated by the spirits of children who have died without baptism. And that is it. Thank you so much for joining me for this 25-day long series, indulging in the terrifying tales within this book. I hope you have enjoyed it, and I hope you have a wonderful spooky month and a happy Halloween. Please share your favorite story in the comments below. And as always, I hope you have a very happy Halloween. Like, comment, subscribe, and all that jazz. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and I will see you next time I post a video. Bye!